I think ISBs went up from 5 billion at the beginning of 2015 to, I think, 15 billion by end of 2019. So there was a 10 billion increase in the ISBs outstanding. Of that 10 billion, 5 billion was accounted for by switching of instruments. Because in 2015, 3.5 billion of portfolio investment was in the rupee securities. As I told you, that's very volatile. And we had a problem because of it. So those flows were reduced from 3.5 billion down to 600 million by the end of 2019. And the swaps, which were about 2.5 billion at the beginning of 2015, were reduced to 500 million. So 5 billion of the increase in ISBs was due to expenditure switching. Because one of the objectives was to increase the maturity and reduce the cost of our external borrowings. So by going from portfolio investment in rupee securities, at that time it was about 12%, that's rupee securities, to ISBs, which were around 6-7%, there was an improvement in cost. And going from highly volatile flows of portfolio inflows to 5 and 10-year maturity ISBs increased the stability of the flows as well. So both in terms of stability and cost, the shift from portfolio investments in rupees to ISBs was a useful thing. Similarly with swaps. Again, the cost and maturity was extended by shifting about 2 billion. So of the 10 billion increase, 5 billion was due to this switching of instruments. The second thing to say is that 4 billion that was raised in 2019, the practice was to have one issuance, usually at the beginning of the year, somewhere around February, March, and we used to raise about 2.5 billion, right? 2.5 billion. So that was actually successfully completed in March. Then we had the Easter bombing. And it was clear, as night follows day, that the government was going to change. It was also clear that the incoming government and the people who were going to be doing economic policy in that government were likely to change policy significantly. And I shouldn't talk for others, but my own thinking at the time was the IMF program will be discontinued. We may have difficulty in retaining our access to capital markets. So we were told by our advisors that the markets were willing to give us some more money, which was very surprising to me because we had had the constitutional crisis in the fourth quarter of 2018. We had the Easter bombing, and people were still saying, you know, we can give you money. Mainly because at that time, we had passed the Active Liability Management Act. We had published the medium-term debt management strategy, and the national export strategy was published. All those things had been put out as to explain how we were going to manage the situation. Our line was, yes, we have a very fragile debt dynamics, but we know how to handle it. And this is what we are doing to handle it. Because of the markets were willing to give us more money, so we took the money to build up our reserves so that even if there was a reversal in policy as there was, we would have a bit of a buffer and give the government a bit more time to go back to the IMF. Because we thought they would leave the IMF, but then we thought that would be the wrong policy and that it would lead to a loss of reserves eventually. But we gave a bit more time for the government to switch course by having by building up our reserves by taking a second ISB. So that's how the 4.5 billion came in 2019, to give really a buffer for the government, which was likely to come in, almost certainly coming in, to basically work things out as to how they wanted to proceed. There's also some verite research which they put out, it's published, that the total debt undertaken between 2015 and 2019, 89% of that was accounted for by repaying previous debt. And in fact, in the World Bank's development update, I can't remember which one, a couple of years ago, their development update had a box in which they said that in 2017, 90% of the total borrowings went to repay previous debt. I mean, I can say this inside this, but we have press here, I'll be careful. You know, government, was basically borrowing to repay debt, much of it. So if we hadn't continued to borrow and issue ISBs and borrow, as I said, the maturity was being increased, cost was being brought down. If we didn't continue to do that, we would have, I think, defaulted much earlier, because we were literally borrowing to repay the debt. But at the same time, by essentially increasing term to maturity, by getting rid of short-term debt, by also increasing non-debt creating inflows through the export strategy, etc., we were gradually trying to contain the situation. In fact, the medium-term debt management strategy, if you read it, you need to have insomnia if you want to read it, but anyway, if you read it, it says basically that we must gradually reduce our external borrowings. Because if you suddenly reduce it, you have a rollover problem. That's what we had in the end. So we were trying to gradually reduce it and increase term to maturity, get rid of swaps and the short-term stuff. So gradually we were trying to get out of it. And I think we were on course, and markets recognized it. That's why they gave us a second ISB. And that was really to have, as I said, to build up a bigger buffer in terms of reserves in case the government wanted to change course, to give them a little bit more of a leeway to do that.